and welcome to another edition of Press Row on Rivalry Family Media. I'm Todd Robbins. Happy to have you along with us for this week in athletics here on Press Row. Been an interesting week to say the least, with, of course, high school spring athletics being suspended, along with education being suspended by the governor of Massachusetts, and confirming that school will not resume in its regular operation until at the earliest the 2020-2021 school year coming up this fall. That means over the next 7 weeks, schools will continue virtual learning and spring athletics will not take place. This week, we're fortunate to have as our guest Fitchburg High School Athletic Director Craig Antocci. Had a couple of great conversations with Craig and looking forward to this one. We were together so long and got into such great detail and conversation, we broke up this conversation into two parts. You'll see part one tonight here on Rivalry Family Media, part two coming up on Friday. Without any further ado, my conversation with Fitchburg High School Athletic Director Craig Antocci, part number one, here on Press Row on Rivalry Family Media. Hello and welcome to Press Row on Rivalry Family Media. I'm Todd Robbins. Happy to have you along with us for another edition of Press Row, and happy today to be joined by Fitchburg High School Athletic Director Craig Antocci. Craig, great to have you here. Obviously, a great time to be talking to an athletic administrator and also an educational administrator in light, obviously, of the governor's announcement that education traditionally on-site, in-person education will not happen for the rest of the 2019-2020 school year, and obviously will extend this virtual learning environment to the natural conclusion of this 2020 school year. And needless to say, an interesting day, both in education and in athletics. What's your initial reaction, obviously, knowing now that at least we know the final item is there will be no return to in-person education in 2020, at least for this 2019-2020 school year?
Yeah, I think that this is a decision that many people have kind of expected was coming, but without the finality of someone saying it, has left a lot of us kind of uncertain and, I don't know, feeling a little anxious about things. Personally, where I sit right now, I'm not happy about the decision because of how it impacts, a lot of the people that I work with. But in the same, there's a sense of relief that at least now we have some stable ground that we can start to build on. That's kind of where I'm sitting now from the athletic standpoint. I think from the education standpoint, our district's done a great job instituting a remote learning model that has been pretty effective. We've engaged a great number of students in our district. I mean, kudos to our admin teams and our teachers and the teachers union really getting on the ball and getting things off the ground. I read somewhere, I believe MIT did a study that Massachusetts is second in the nation in remote learning. And I'd like to believe that's because of the hard work from faculty members and administrators in districts like ours.
You've had a unique viewpoint. Obviously, you've been in athletics now for a couple of years, but you, over the long term, are a former classroom teacher. So you've got the perspective of what obviously traditional education is like, and then what this transition may feel like. You've got at least an instinct of what it may feel like. How do you feel education has transitioned to this more remote environment? It's certainly from my perspective as an educator, particularly because I'm a more hands-on class, it still feels kind of awkward in some ways.
Oh, every piece of it feels awkward. I think a good portion of education is the routine. It's very, everything we do is routine oriented. As a classroom teacher yourself, when kids come into your classroom, you get them, a good portion of what you do is getting them acclimated to how your classroom works, how you can build that comfort and relatable framework. So everybody kind of knows what's going to happen every day when they walk in. This remote learning model is something entirely different. It's kind of this on-demand, as a teacher, I'm putting it out there for you as a student so you can sample it whenever you get an opportunity to look at it. You really lack that personal touch. Everybody who says out there that, you could do distance learning or online platforms to replace public education in general. I mean, I think that this is proven that you really can't, because it is the guiding hand of the teacher, those personal relationships that makes education so valuable. And that's one thing that I think everyone's missing, from the admin, faculty to the students. Everybody's missing that personal touch, those routines, those those relatable moments that we kind of thrive on, you know? I know as an athletic administrator, it's like my job ended, just evaporated, you know, when we left school and they paused the season. So for coaches and ADs like myself, it's been a real, I don't even know, I don't really have the words to be able to articulate what it's felt like. Man, I'm kind of lost in the breeze.
Without question. And of course, you mentioned the part of education where that guiding hand isn't there when you're trying to do it virtually. And I think probably one of the most difficult parts is the student engagement piece, because now more than just coming to school, which was kind of how you got students, once you could get them in the building, you knew you could get them engaged. As long as you get them from class to class, you could get them engaged somehow. That was your primary responsibility, as that guiding hand. Now you've got to kind of chide and push from email and post to your Google Classrooms and other ways to kind of hopefully get them to engage in the virtual environment, to show up at these meetings. I find, at least, it's a lot more difficult than connecting with them and just getting them to get to the building, to get them to engage in this virtual model.
Yeah, you lack that point of contact, right? There's a portion that portion of the day you spend on the phone calling families, trying to get in touch with a student. If you're an educator of an elementary school student, now you're calling parents and trying to get in touch with parents. If you're in a district like Fitchburg, there might be a language barrier or some communication gap that you have to bridge. So yeah, I mean, this has been wholly challenging, but I'd like to think that all of us, educators like yourself and my wife, who is in the house with me here, are really rising to this challenge, and students are doing the same. I don't think engagement is 100% where we'd like to see it across the board with everyone, but I think that kids are giving an honest effort, and I think that adults are too, making the best of a really difficult time, a historic time.
I know one of the real kind of debates at the state level about making this decision final, outside of the world of athletics and just in education, was a real want from the education side of things to hopefully create a scenario where students could return, so that some form of diagnostic could be performed as to what the gaps were, and hopefully be able to use the summertime to close those gaps in some way before returning, hopefully, to a traditional model in 2020, 2021. Knowing now that that won't be a possibility, how can we close gaps as educators and educational professionals in order to hopefully, bridge what we know, regardless, from K to 12 and beyond to the college level? We know there are going to be knowledge gaps, and I don't think a test necessarily was needed to prove it. The second half of this school year kind of has, as you termed it a few moments ago, evaporated. So at this point, be it that it's gone, we're doing the best we can to supplement. We know gaps are going to exist. How can we fill those gaps without actually getting back together?
Great question. I know that in Fitchburg, we're going to look at summer programming, trying to identify students where those, due to equity of access issues or really any kind of extenuating circumstances, really prevented them from engaging with this distance learning model. We're going to look to kind of bring them in, hopefully over the summertime, start to do those triage and then start to treat those gaps. But I don't know that will be wholly effective. I think as an entire educational institution, as in the state of Massachusetts or really nationwide, we're going to have to, when we get the opportunity to get these students back in front of us, understand that we can't hit the ground running at 1,000 miles an hour and just push forward. We're going to have to deal with the social and emotional gaps, these blocks that are going to stand in our way. We're going to have to really deal with the outfall of this pandemic and what it has done to the psyche of us as educators and then the students who are being educated. And we're gonna have to build common ground there. And once we get some common ground built there, now we can start to honestly look at the gaps and start to fill them in on an individual basis using some tools that exist out there. I know in Fitchburg, we've invested in some technological tools that are very granular and very spot focused. iReady is one that I can think of that'll, for each student assess where they are mathematically, and then also with literacy standards. So we can kind of work on a student by student basis to kind of fill those gaps in those two key areas. But honestly, to think that we're going to get this done in a month when we come back I don't think realistic. We're going to have to build common ground around this this event, this historical event that none of us have ever lived through. And if we have grandparents that were, 100 years old, maybe they lived through the Spanish flu pandemic, but this is unprecedented. So we're going to have to spend time kind of building that common ground again before we can start to push forward.
It will be a bold new world, and of course, athletically, it has already become a bold new world. This, at least, with the decision handed down from the governor and pending from the MIAA now to make it official. This spring season, of course, will not happen. As a former spring coach and now athletic director, how difficult is it to know that an entire season has been lost?
Oh my God, it's devastating. I think as an adult, I have a way of compartmentalizing, right? Like I understand why it happened. I know that there will be a fall season for me as an adult. To think about our seniors who will never get a chance to don the red and gray again. I was actually just fielding a text message from one of our seniors on the softball team, just asking to wear the uniform one more time. Can we just put the uniform on and take some pictures so we can all feel like we're a part of a team again? This is unbelievably challenging because, the event in and of itself, if you just discuss the event, I think you could shake it off. In 30 years from now, people won't understand it. But in this time and place, this is a real hole. Athletics are something that these are positive lesson learning experiences. These are reasons why students will engage with the school community. There's a long tradition of families who have participated in athletics. To have this all just removed from everyone's life, there's going to be an outfall of this, like I said, from the social and emotional piece that we'll be dealing with for a while. Now that the decision has been made final and we know we're not coming back, I think from where I sit, I've been very slow to kind of get on the board of honoring seniors. I know that some of the other athletic directors, I'm thinking of Steve Kendall right now, has done a great job of putting up senior posts. And I love that idea, but I didn't want to start to go down that road before we knew, right? Because if we're going to have a season, then we'll have a season anyway, and we'll honor seniors on their senior day. Now that that's gone, right? Good God, I don't know, Todd. I'm just trying to ideate, and I don't have great answers right now. I'm still in shock from Governor Baker's announcement overall.
No, it's amazing to think that perhaps that red and gray group of seniors that walked off the field last year as juniors, completing their spring season last year, didn't realize at that moment in time that when they left the field, they would never put the uniform back on because, as we know, not every athlete's a 3-sport athlete or even a 2-sport athlete. So some kids really are specialized to one season of the year. So if you were a softball athlete or a girls lacrosse athlete or a boys lacrosse athlete, you missed your final senior season. Talk about what those seniors have meant to the Fitchburg athletic program, over their 4-year career, and obviously the contributions they've made in growing the athletic program.
I think we've got a really special senior class right now. It's not one of the larger classes in the building. In fact, it's one of the smaller classes in the building, but it has some unbelievable characters in it. And I don't say characters as in like unique or flamboyant personalities, although we have those as well, but that, phenomenal people that will be sorely missed and that I think really deserve to be honored on their way out the door for the contributions they've made. Like you said, some of the kids I can think of, Elise Pierce is a softball player. Elise Pierce is a fantastic individual, has been in the musical for all 3 years that she was in the high school. She'll be in the musical again this year. She would always bounce back and forth between the softball field and the musical. She was a mid-watch all-star as a center fielder last year. Things were looking really bright for her, and they will be bright in the future. But to not have her, not having the opportunity to step on the field, I know that she's feeling that pain right now. But there are baseball seniors that will not get the chance to touch the field. Kids that, Sammy Robichaud's one that I can think of off the top of my head. He said last year, he took at-bats for granted, thinking he'd always get another one. Senior year will be the year. And now not to have that pulled away from him, I know there's a sense of loss. And from a contribution piece, his work ethic, Sam's work ethic, has been unparalleled. He's played varsity baseball for all 4 years, if this was the 4th year of his career at Fitchburg High. He's been part of, along with Edwin Santana and Devin LeBlanc, another fantastic human being, the kind of resurgence of Red Raider baseball under Ray Cosenza. These guys have done everything that's been asked of them, been totally selfless to the point that it's hard to really describe to people the sacrifices they've made, the work that they do out of season that nobody sees, to hone their skills. God, the work ethic has transformed the athletic department on a grassroots level. Although wins and losses, I don't know that we see that across the board right now. I think anybody who has an internal eye on Fitchburg High School knows the contributions that these people have made. And it is in being high character people who work exceptionally hard year round. They're not, although they might only play one sport, they are working really hard at that one sport that they play, and then supporting all other athletes in the building as well. So, long answer to a short question, Todd. I mean, massively impactful students.
That's the great part of
seniors, and they'll be sorely missed.
That's the great part of Press Row, Craig. We can have short questions and long answers and go on as long as we like. It's the great part about this program. We have nothing to interrupt us along the way. I think you made some great points about your seniors and obviously their overall contribution. And I want to go back and dig it a little bit more what you had said about that mindset. Right, in sports, we always have that mindset, and you encourage student athletes to have that mindset of there's always next year, there's always the next at bat, there's always the next game. That we know, being involved in athletics as long as we have, particularly either whether it's interscholastic or intercollegiate, there is a 4-year window for a lot of students, and maybe if you're fortunate enough to get to expand, an 8-year window perhaps to reach your pinnacle athletically. But then there is a finite end when it will come to an end, when there is no more. But perhaps you're right. For those sophomores and juniors who thought that this year was that year, was going to be that year, particularly those that were juniors now are seniors, should be competing in their last year, something that maybe perhaps they took for granted, that they would get one more opportunity to go at this, isn't a thing. It is very difficult for an athlete to deal with, and it's got to be difficult for a coach to deal with as well, because you encourage that mindset. It's always pick up the next time, pick up the next time. When there is no next time, what do you do?
Yeah, right. I think we use that term when we're talking about performance, right? Don't hang your hat on a great performance, and also don't get too low with a bad performance, because there's always going to be a next time for you. And I think that that's true. That's an axiom. But I also think that this really highlights that we should never take any of our opportunities for granted. And we say that around injury all the time, right? You never know when your last play is going to be, because it could all end in a heartbeat. And especially like on the football field, I think about that as a former football guy. You never know. You never know when your last play is going to be, so you really want to leave it on the field. Well, this pandemic has really kind of highlighted how true that is, right? Never, ever, ever give less than your best effort, because you might not get the chance to give better effort in the future, right? And that is a lesson that I think everyone needs to take out of this. I see those pictures that they float around on Twitter. It'll be like, a bunch of guys running a wind sprint and one person stops short of the line. And it'll point at the line and say the difference between winning and losing. And that kind of sticks in my mind when I think about this situation here. Like, why sell yourself short ever? When we do get the opportunity to step back on that field, right? Results aside, control what you can control. And that is give your best in everything you do. And that lesson from athletics should translate into anything else you do in life, and honestly, we'll guarantee a measure of success in what you choose to do.
No question about that. And of course, you mentioned some of the performances and some of the things that you were hopeful for and expectant of from this 2020 season that obviously isn't going to be at this point in time. Highlight a few of those items, or as many as you can think of, as it relates to to spring sports at Fitchburg this year. What were the things you were hopeful of seeing, and now obviously we know aren't going to happen?
Yeah, I mean, I would have liked to see. I lost you there. I'm
Yeah,
back.
we lost you there for a second, Craig, but we got you back. You were talking about what in the spring 2020 season you were hopeful of being able to see, and now unfortunately will not be able to.
Yeah, absolutely. So I would be looking for our baseball team to qualify for the postseason again. Um, each year we've been knocking on the door of getting out of the first round. Last year gave St. John's a nice run up at St. John's. And I think our team has put in a lot of work, and I really would have liked to see them have the opportunity to prove themselves on that Division I stage again. And I think that this year we would have taken that step forward, honestly. And that's something that, again, is disappointing that we can't see, but that would have been something I would have been looking for. I would have looked for our softball team to take a step forward this year. Last year was a rebuilding year. We were fairly young, and the girls put in a lot of work. I know Emily Bourgeois, who's a junior, she pitched every inning for us last year, worked really hard in the off season, gained about 10 miles an hour on her fastball and a couple extra pitches. And I think it would have made a difference. We would have been competitive for that 500 record to get us into the playoffs. On the track and field side, we've had, this would have been the senior year for Elle Scott and Winola Shaju on the girls, just two that pop right out for me. I think about them running the records they've set. Winola, committed to being a triple jumper now at UMass Lowell. Would have been great to see her jump in the pits down at Crocker one more time. On the boys track side, boys track under Coach Jack Scott in his first year, we've seen a lot of positives. Kids really getting invested in that program. Fitchburg High should be a track powerhouse. And I think, when you go back, a decade, you see Fitchburg High having very successful teams on the track and in the pits. And I think that we were starting to turn the corner on that. We had a good indoor season, and we were starting to move forward into the spring season. So I'd love to see some of the individual performances from some of our football players that have really invested themselves in the track program. One person I can think of off the top of my head, Gio Maroney, who's going to play football at UNH. And he has spent the entire football off season working on his speed, working relentlessly to get faster so he can be successful at the next level. Would have loved to see that. And then from the lacrosse standpoint, we would have had girls lacrosse at Crocker Field. Would have played a couple games under the lights this spring. That would have been fantastic. I don't know how many people we would have got to come down on a cold April night, but I would have been there, and I would have been loving every minute of it. And it would have been an opportunity that we haven't had previously. And then on the boys lacrosse side, we were co-oping with Lunenburg for the first time. So to see how our boys, our very serious lacrosse players, really functioned on a high level team, these are all things I was kind of looking forward to. And then I didn't even mention tennis, which is always an interesting group of individuals. And the girls tennis team was very successful last year, qualified for the tournament, albeit we lost the first round. But for a school like ours to be in the tournament was excellent.
No question about it.
So it's kind of the rundown.
It's so difficult to see what happens with things like tennis and other sports that are team oriented. Golf is another one that comes to mind, because although it is a team sport, it is so much about individual performance within a team sport. Like you said, you get some kind of interesting cross-trained athletes and individuals that come together to create these teams that maybe, were involved in these sports more recreationally and now are stepping into competition for the first time. This is not a sport that's wildly popular in Massachusetts from a competitive standpoint, the way it might be in Florida or California or Arizona or some of these other places. And then you see these teams come together and kids get these great launching points, for these what were recreational sports for them to that note, by the way, I want to jump back and talk about the, your track and field athletes that have committed to a Division I athletic program. People talk about how difficult it is for a Massachusetts athlete to be successful and convert from being a, Central Mass athlete to a Division I athlete. And track and field is one of those places where, they can still achieve that goal. You can still rise and achieve and get the opportunities to grow and become a Division I athlete in a sport like track and field, where maybe a sport like football and baseball and some of these other places have become more difficult to get that translation.
Yeah. We obviously, having the field house at Fitchburg High School and having all of the best track athletes in Central Mass kind of go through there at some point, because we host the districts every year. It's really kind of raised the bar for our kids, because they see, how successful they can be when they start to compete with the best of the best, so to speak. We make a lot of trips to Reggie Lewis. Yep. So we compete with the best kids in the state. We compete with the best kids in the region. And I think the lesson that's really been learned by our athletes has been preached by our coaches, from Coach Lamy and Coach Scott now back to Coach Woods, is if you're willing to put the work in and you have a little bit of talent, man, we can get you there, right? We're going to work with you to get you to where you need to be. And, Central Mass has really been a hotbed for track and field kind of stars that have moved on and started to run at the higher levels. When you talk about that kind of Division I scholarship athlete in track and field, it's important for me to mention there that a lot of these kids, although we have a lot of kids getting scholarships in sports like football, who are training in track and field in their off season, because speed kills. Right? Speed kills on the football field. If you're fast, the way the game has transitioned, if you're fast, you're going to make a living. So like I said, Gio Moroni, one thing, he is very physical, he's very strong, but if he wants to play at the level, he's got to be fast. And that's what track and field is going to do for kids. It's going to make them explosive. It's going to discipline them to compete. I'm a big believer in participation in track and field. And you can see it. I think that if you look at a lot of the area schools in the Midwatch, you've got a lot of really talented track and field athletes that also play other sports. But if you don't play other sports, again, I'm just kind of thinking off the top of my head here. If you're just a track and field kid, you're, a kid like Winola Shaju. Man, she came in, worked for 4 years, and ran her way into a jumping scholarship. She worked her butt off, worked her tail off. And it's one of those things. It's every time you go out and you train, you put it in the bank, right? You bank it. And she's a kid that banked a lot. So she's got a lot of equity, a lot of buy power now. And there's a lot of kids out there in Central Mass running track doing that.
That have the ability to do it. And like you said, the importance of that cross-training piece, being able to, outside of your, maybe what you consider to be your premier sport or the sport you want to exercise for the future, there are ways to do that, whether it's indoor track, outdoor track, or some other form of cross-trained athletics that can support what you want to do in your primary sport. Craig, I want to turn our attention a little bit more forward-looking here to obviously what a potential return to, we're going to put normal in quotes, because I don't know that anybody knows what that looks like anymore. But let's presume normal for the moment means that we go back to school the end of August, beginning of September 2020 for the 2020-2021 school year, that we are greenlit and cleared to return to normal activities. Can athletics resume under normal circumstances? What we know, athletics, I don't care what the sport is, even if it's a quote unquote non-contact sport, they're close quarter sports. People get close together. And when you're talking about an insidious, invisible disease like COVID-19 that travels in these droplets that you can't see in distances closer than 6 feet, that's pretty much every athletic event that I know of functions within a 6-foot bubble. Personal space is not something you can really have in athletics. So as I think about fall 20 and winter 2021, I'm trying to see, without herd immunity or a broadly available vaccine, what other protections we could take to make normal athletics function.
Oh man, it's going to be, you raised some great points there. Listening to the health professionals that are out there, they're talking about until there is significant testing and then tracing. So if we know someone's sick, to trace all of their contacts so we can be assured effectively that anyone participating on the field is not sick, is not a carrier of this virus. Until we have that, I really don't know what this is going to look like. And I think that's why there's so much uncertainty out there. Like you said, athletics is about close quarters. So my mind goes immediately to football, right? We're going to play football. Guys are going to be rubbing all over each other. But then what happens with the 2,000 people that are in attendance sitting next to each other when it's cold, herded close to one another? I mean, these are some real challenging questions that, as a administrator, I'm really looking for guidance from, Governor Baker and the MIA and the people who are the real policymakers here, so we can follow it. Because like you said, normal is just a word, right? What normal looks like, I'm not even sure what that's going to look like in the fall. You nailed it. That could look like anything. We're going to be in this wait and see mode. It's funny you say, what does fall athletics look like? Let me just segue a little bit here. The first thing that flashed in my mind when I saw that school was done, what does graduation look like? Mm-hmm. Right? This is like right. It's supposed to be a month from now. How the hell are we going to pack, traditionally 5,000 people in a Crocker field and graduate our seniors? How do we do that? As much as we say like football is a full contact sport, graduation at Crocker Field is like a full contact sport sometimes with everybody jammed in so tight. So to answer your question, I don't know what normal looks like. You nailed it. I have no idea. We're going to run cross country races and we'll start runners at staggered times. We'll start one runner and we'll have, 30 different stopwatches. I don't see how we could play sports like football or soccer or a lot of these things, given the current conditions, if we're still in a highly transmissible environment. I mean, all bets are off.
No question about that. And I think it's been the part that's really kind of stuck out to me. I had even, said in another conversation in an earlier episode, I've been trying to imagine what even returning to quote unquote normal school would look like, in the sense that, am I going to walk into my classroom and it's more of a computer lab conference room area where we teach radio and TV. And I'm thinking, we're in a horseshoe room. Am I going to be walking in, A, myself wearing a mask, and then B, am I going to be staring at 15 to 20 students who are also looking back at me through masks? That to me just is a bizarre way of trying to connect with that. So then we extend that naturally to the athletics programs. Are we going to be wearing all of these, football will take it with a helmet and shoulder pads and all the different padding that are in the pants and what have you, and then we're going to have a face mask on of some kind as well? Is that going to be the thing that's going to allow this to take place? I'm just having a really difficult time with that, and then a really difficult time with the thought that we extend the loss of these kinds of competitions and normal pieces of daily life from society. I mean, there's that kind of dual problem here, right? You have the public health issue, which absolutely has to take place first. And then you have the mental health issue that comes on the other side of that, where there are these losses of normal operation.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Anyone who asks me questions about when are we going to get started with high school sports, I always direct them to, look at the professional sports. They've been losing millions of dollars, millions and millions, hundreds of millions of dollars, and they can't figure out how to get back in stadiums. So until, like I said, we get a better testing model like they're asking for, or we get these kind of contact tracing that really under control the way the government's asking for, I have no idea what this is going to look like. We're going to be again, it's going to be a very fluid situation going forward. When you're talking about kids with masks on in your classroom, one of the questions, or one of the things that's been brought up in a lot of the administrative meetings is, how do we get kids to school in an environment where we're still trying to distance? How do you put 40 kids on a school bus, right? Or then if you extend that out to athletics, how do I get 70 players to Neshoba Regional High School for a football game on a Friday night? How many buses do I need to send them on? And then, or from the football standpoint, how do I get all of that gear sanitized from, day-to-day environment, helmet, shoulder pads? The mind boggles, right? If we're in this environment going forward, I don't have the answers, unfortunately.
And speculation will abound. And of course, the financial situation and the fallout from that, I think, still has yet to be understood as well, because all the things that you're pointing to, whether it's additional buses, whether it's sanitizing equipment, whether it's all of those things happening together, is going to take more money, which means that money has got to trickle down in some ways from the federal to the state and local governments in order to be able to make these things happen. And education as it is, we at least are seeing projected out, is going to have to function on smaller and smaller budgets, which means smaller and smaller budgets for extracurricular and co-curricular activities like athletics as well.
Absolutely. I think that was brought up at, our ID's meeting last week. A lot of our budgets, I mean, if we're in the best case scenario, we'll be flat going forward. But given the what seems to be, multiple $billion tax shortfall in the state of Massachusetts, we're talking $5 or $6 billion. That's going to trickle down to the schools. And as much as athletics is really important to most people, it falls somewhere down the list on that rank order of importance when you really consider it. So, I think everyone here is watching with their eyes wide open, and then really thinking hard about how to do more with less. And that's something I've already started to consider on my end. How do we keep the programming status quo with less money in place to get it done? So, in my own mind, I've started to jot notes and start to think about it. But again, trying to be prepared for all eventualities, but not really go too far down any one road. So I kind of don't spin my wheels too much.
No question about that. Not to mention the guidance at the state level is fluctuating so much with the changes that continue to come. It's hard to get down any one direct road, not knowing what, basically veer is going to come at you at any one point in time. Of course, athletics is such an environment that involves, building family, right? And you're trying to, as an athlete, and now knowing you're not coming back together, build a socially distant family of athletics somewhere along the way. How difficult is that, and what's the message you want to spread to your athletes, knowing now obviously this season is concluded, we're projecting our way out to next season, you're going to have to work during this off season to get yourself prepared for whatever your next item is, and to build your team and your athletic community. What kind of a message do you want to spread to your athletes today?
It's not over, right? It's not over. I think it's easy to be fatalistic in times like this. It's easy to look at bad news that the school year is canceled, or the spring 2020 season is canceled, and kind of get despondent, kind of get beat down. And I would really say to everyone and that it's not over. This is not over, because your life did not end today. Although, we got some disappointing news about this spring, we will be back in some capacity when they allow us to come back. And when we come back, we need to be prepared. Sports is a wonderful thing, but what the underpinning of it is lifelong fitness. So I really want everyone to get out there, get involved, stay fit, stay active. A lot of us love to compete. Find ways to compete against yourself, whether it be, I could do 20 push-ups, in one go today. Tomorrow I'm going to try 25. Right? If you're a runner, get out there and, start recording mileage and times. Get out there and still be competitive. Find ways to be competitive, because this is not over. That's the message I want to get out to really everyone, is continue to work hard, stay positive, stay fit. Because if you're fit physically, it's going to help you stay fit mentally. And that's what we're going to need to really overcome this in the long run.
And that was part one of our conversation with Fitchburg High School Athletic Director, Craig Antocci. You can see part two on Press Row here on Rivalry Family Media coming up this Friday, streaming at 7:30 here on Facebook Live, on demand to follow on YouTube. Thank you so much for joining us on this edition of Press Row here on Rivalry Family Media. I'm Todd Robbins. Until Friday, so long, everybody.